before we dive into some texturing, let's try one more thing. I don't really have a plan for this. This is more like riffing, and let's try to create something that's very different and possibly not so believable, and let's try to turn that into a believable terrain. And I think that touches upon the core of what makes a procedural terrain a procedural terrain. So let's. I think I want to create some sort of hill. So I'm going to go and create a radial gradient. I'm going to leave it at default. It's a 8 square kilometer terrain. So let's see. Here we have it. I'm going to chop this up a little bit. So I'm going to create a gradient, and I'm going to lower the width a little bit. This seems okay. And for the tiling, I'm going to select discontinuous. So it creates this sawtooth pattern. Now I think the easiest way we can have this look like this is if we distort it. So I'm going to go to filter and create simple displacement. This will create the distortion that we're looking for. So give it the input. And let's see, let's start increasing the strength. There we go, that looks good. Let's try changing the direction a little. Oh, there we go. This is definitely nothing that any geological formation would really look like. So let's play with this a little bit. I think we might make this look better with a little bit of terracing. So let's see, let's create a terrace node, and I'm going to give it the output and also modulate it with itself. Okay, I think we can work with that. So I'm not going to really change the settings a lot. I think the only thing I'm going to be careful about is get this gap a little closer. So let's sort of try moving this around a little. The gap's moved on the other side, but I think this should work. So now we have some really sharp edges, and I want to soften that a little bit. So I'm going to go back, create a combiner so that we can combine with the original. So we have the distorted version, and then we combine with the original. So instead of this, it becomes this, just a little more demure, I guess. So now this thing, these sharp drops, they are going to be a big problem when it comes to erosion. So there's not much you can do. You can try blurring it a little bit, but you will end up losing detail for sure. The only surefire way to really make sure that these vertical lines don't become a problem is if you use thermal erosion. We saw this when we were creating that mountain terrain, that with heat fusion, we get these soft, there you go, here, we get these softened lines. The cliffs have a nice talus to them. So I'm going to go to two-phase. I think 25 is good enough. Play with the rock angle a little bit. I think the default, or close to default, is pretty good. I'm just going to leave that there. We only wanted to get the sharp edges softened a little bit, and this has done that. So now it's time to add that little bit of procedural goodness. So let's get our favorite, the Berlin noise, and blend it equally with the output of thermal weathering. And there we go, we have something that looks like a mountain. I think that we can displace this once more just to get that cool look going. We take this, and then we use the amount from the original Berlin itself. So now let's try. going to keep using centered. You can take off centered. If you do that and if you start getting these lines, it's a good idea to use mirror interior values. So it makes it go away by repeating the interior values, flipping them over. Let's try a different direction if we can. Let's try more strength. Now that we don't have the centering, we can afford to have a little bit more strength. I think 20 degrees looks good. This is creating a nice shape. And I think this is ready enough that we can create erosion. So let's see. Let's stick with defaults for most of it, because there really is a lot of nice detail in the original that when it gets eroded, even with the loss of the minute detail, the large features will still remain. I think the only change I would like to make is use inverse filtering, so we get these cool crags poking out. Everything else, I think, should suffice. I think this is worthy of a build, so let's try it. So let's go to the big view to see what this looks like. I think this is pretty fantastic for something that we were able to build in just a few minutes. There's a lot of detail here from the original terrain that just got softened in the erosion. But because of the combination of the strong purlin noise and then displacement, just moving everything about, and then of course the original terracing that we added, it creates a lot of holdout areas where the rock formation stays. Like this is a little holdout area, so the flow comes in here, another comes in here, same thing happening all over, and you get to have this cool looking terrain. So this is a good example of how you can take anything that looks not really all that believable and transform that into a terrain with just a little bit of decent texturing. It can look like a photograph. Now that we have this terrain here, and this looks pretty good, I think we can take it just one step further and explore a type of terrain that we haven't talked about yet: snowy mountains. Now that's always a very cool thing to create, and there's always a lot of demand for that. Now here we have soil-based features, like it's erosive, and so everything created here is from things flowing out. Now, snow works a little differently. It will actually build up on top of the rock formations in the land. So to do that, World Machine has a really cool device known as the snow device, and as it says on the can, it will add snow. I'm going to bring back our little preview window. So this is our erosion, and here is the same with snow. Let's just do a quick build with just the defaults so we can see what this device actually does. So now with the built device, if we zoom in and just take a look, you will notice that the strong flow lines are gone and replaced by a soft buildup. So instead of this, we now have this. And so this is snow accumulating everywhere. So if it's flat enough to hold snow, you'll start seeing this softness come in. Now, these are the properties for snow. Very simple. This is the snow amount, and that's what we will increase. Now you'll notice that this is a very slow device. It takes a lot of processing power. So when you use it, be prepared to have it respond a little slowly. But that wait is always worth it because it always creates these fantastic looking terrains. I think this is a good amount of snow. I'll lower it just a little bit. I'll go to 40. The snow line is where the snow ends. If I bring it up, you'll see it only exists up here. So it's kind of like an altitude mask that you might have to create yourself otherwise. But this is built in and is often much better looking than if you were to simply mask it. So I'll bring this down a little. but not all the way. Well, this is looking pretty much all the way, so there. So now this region is unaffected, this part is affected. And let's equalize this just a little bit more. Dragging this can often be a little problematic because of the slow response time, because this is a heavy device. So typing a value in is often better. There. So now we have snow coming down up to here. Down here, there isn't that much snowfall. We can also choose the intensity of the snowfall. And there you can see the buildup increased significantly. So I think I want to push this to the maximum. There, we have a lot of snow now. And the evaporative balance is basically just how fast snow evaporates. And so if you go with a lower value, it's not really evaporating all that much and you get a giant blob. Especially since our snow amount and intensity is very high. So if we bring it down here, you can see we get a lot of snow. It's covered pretty well, but that's still too much for us. So I'll go for 9.9. This is good. This is a lot of snow, but not so much that we completely lose our terrain. You can also choose to taper the snowfall, and that'll taper off the snowfall, but that's not something that we want necessarily for this. We actually want to have a lot of snow. So there we have it. This is now ready to be built. So you can see, even at 2048, this took almost a minute to build, and that was just this one device, not the whole world. So let's see. The effect of it is fantastic, actually, because we now have a lot of really cool snow coverage. I think this deserves to be textured. So let's bring in an overlay device and connect the two outputs. The second output is the depth mask, so that's the amount of snow. Now we will need to colorize this, so bring in our colorizer. There we go. This creates a good mask for the snow. So let's lock the preview here, and now I'll show you how I like to control the mask a little bit. Even if the mask is not that strong, the color gradient that we create here can still make it strong. So if we just pull this back, there's automatically a lot of snow. Let's say if we create this again, we have that stark contrast. We can bring this further back if we like, or not. Just adjust it a little more. And then here, actually let's keep this black. Now the reason I didn't give this any color is that we will not pass this on directly. Let's take the normal terrain and let's use one of the macros that ships with World Machine to create the texture for this. So I'll unlock the preview, go to the macros tab and load a macro known as basic coverage. It can be found inside the coverage library, and what it does is it takes your basic terrain and it'll take erosion input if you give it. So I think we'll give it the deposition map, and you will notice it's creating all this for us. So now we can pass that to the overlay device, lock our preview, and there we have a beautifully textured terrain, even in this unbuilt state. So let's build it. So let's build it. And there you can see it has a fantastic level of detail. This is all done procedurally, and this is a very handy macro to use. If you open it up, you get options for choosing the colors that you want. I think because we're going for a snow-covered terrain, the sand color may not work that well, so I'm going to select a slightly darker tone and heavily desaturated. that looks good. And the erosion also, I think we need to desaturate a little bit. And there we go. Now this also has lighting built in. You can uncheck the lighting if you don't want it. I think if you're better without lighting, because we're going to mix the color output with something else. You can always choose where the slope gets cut off. We'll have to keep it low for our terrain here because there's a lot of snow here, so you naturally wouldn't see any grass. There's also the height cutoff that can help accentuate it a little. So I'm going to use just a little bit of that. Right now the height cover is inverted. You can switch it to change the distribution a little bit. I think inverted looks better in this case, so we'll keep it like that. Now we'll take the snow and add it on top of this. So to do that, we'll create a combiner and mix the two. So the combiner will work just as well with a bitmap device as it would with a height field device. And the method that you would use to combine work like blend modes in Photoshop when you combine it with a bitmap. So I think we can try a few different ones. Max is good because it won't bleed out the edges like add or screen would. And we can try add. You'll notice it just bleeds out the edges with color. That's not really good. Screen will do a little less of it, but then the edges look a little flat. With max, there's a slight hardness to the edges, which I think works well for the snow that we have here. So we can choose the strength. I think just a little under maximum is good. And now if we take a look, you'll see we have a lot of snow here. I think apart from this, I would like the top of this to be a little white as well. So to do that, instead of just having snow that just flows out here, let's say if we wanted to have a little bit of snow up here, the easy way to do that would be to just create a select height device, and we will select the top. Go exponential as always, but this time we'll use a lower fall off. That way we can bring this down a little bit. And where we colorize this, right before we do that, we will of course combine the two. So when we combine them with this and with this, we get something like this. And now with the overlay preview locked, we can go back to our select height and change what we want. This is a great way to just add that snowy peak very quickly if you wanted. With the exponential, of course, you can use the fall off as a very good control. And this gives us a very good way to create a snow mask. So let's do another build. And you'll notice most of the color operations are usually very, very fast. They didn't even take a full second. So now with the full terrain built, let's go to full screen preview. And let's just fly around our terrain here. So what I love is that the snow device has created these very believable snowbanks, and they're flowing in and they're coming down from here as the snow melts and regathers and gets frozen again. So the same thing happens up here, and it changes the profile of the terrain just enough to make it look like an actual snowy mountain from a distance. If you were to just simply give this color map to the original eroded device, it wouldn't look that good. And after all, believability is where we're going. So now, with this device ready, and we have a decent amount of snowfall up here, I think we should start looking at how you would like to export this. So Let's go back and take a look at what we have. So we have two separate outputs now. We have the main height field output, which is generated by all these devices. So I'll take them up here. And then we have these, which I think I'll group for safety. This is the bitmap output. Now finally we're getting this thing here, and I'll bring back the preview window so you can see. In fact, let's try the 2D preview so you can see the output coming out. So this is the basic coverage. You can choose to output this separately so that this kind of combining that has happened in the bitmap, you can actually export this as a base map, add procedural noise on top of it, and whatever 3D package that you're working with, you can harness the power of that to get you more flexibility during the design process afterwards. So let's see. I'll create the bitmap output device. This saves an RGB output instead of the height field, which we'll use to save just the height field. Now a second height field that we can save is the snow mask, and it's this one. This is what we are sending out, and the colorizer, and then that gets added on top of this. So the colorizing process would be obviously handled in the 3D package that you would use. You would need to make sure the values are clamped like this. And if you wanted, you could always just take a bitmap device, save it here, and send out the colorizer data. You can always just add a bias and gain filter right here and then send it out. Doesn't matter, whatever works for you. All of these are perfectly valid options. And so with the snow mask and then the base terrain output, you'd be able to combine this bitmap in your 3D package and then apply it on top of the terrain. Now the terrain itself, we've been exporting before as a TGA file. It's 16-bit and usually works best. You can also use a TIFF format. They're globally accepted. Now, if you actually wanted to output a mesh, a World Machine gives you that option as well. So what you can do is create a mesh output device and connect it to the height field just like you would with the height output, and it will create this mesh for you. The mesh output has a few really useful options. The one I use all the time is export using quads. It just makes for a cleaner mesh, and unless you have some very specific requirements, it will save you a lot of pain by removing a little bit of aliasing, especially on the sharp tips and other noise heavy features on the terrain. You can choose to have a regular mesh triangulation, which means it'll take the output of whatever you have set as the base resolution for the terrain. In our case, it's 2048 by 2048, and then triangulate that and then export it. Or you can choose to have simple mesh reduction. So with this, you can choose the polygon count in thousands, and it will target that. So it'll decimate it in memory and send out what you want. So this is really useful if you wanted to just have a lower polygon mesh, something that is lighter, and then you can use the height output as a potential displacement on top of it, or you can also create a normal map. So World Machine has a very simple normal map maker. You give it the main output. Let me organize this a little better. And here you go. It'll create this normal map from your height field, and you can choose to flip the axes if you need. And so with a slightly lower quality mesh and a very high quality normal map, you can get that same amount of detail. This is very useful, especially for in-game assets and even cinematic quality productions, because the level of quality you get with the normals is pretty good. And then of course we have our bitmap output, so we can actually have a second bitmap output. I like to export the same thing that we see in the overlay device, because as I'm working on getting the materials right, if I needed to have something quickly just to see how it fits in the entire environment, or if I wanted to show it to someone, perhaps someone on the team who needs to see what's happening so they can start working on the stuff on their end, then this bitmap can be very useful, because you don't have to waste any time trying to get that basic look right. It's just there. So with all these different output types, you can get the mesh to look really good and have a really solid model.